Welcome to The Explainer. You know, sometimes in the news world, the media itself is the story, and that's exactly what we're looking at today. We're breaking down this really fired-up segment from Sky News Australia where they made a huge claim that other media outlets are actually siding with Iran's oppressive regime instead of its people. So let's unpack exactly how they built that argument.
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the core accusation that kicked everything off. Then, we're diving into the two main examples they used, one about the ABC and another involving the morning show, Sunrise. After that, we'll get into their theory about why this is supposedly happening, and we'll wrap up with their pretty intense final call to action.
All right, let's jump right in with that core accusation. Look, the Sky News segment did not hold back at all. They opened with a really stark claim that pretty much set the tone for the entire debate right from the get-go.
This is the exact quote they led with. The host said, "How many in the media seem to side more with a terrorist theocracy than the very vulnerable people slaughtered by the extremist Muslim state of Iran?" I mean, that is a seriously powerful opening line, right? And it really becomes the foundation for everything else they're about to argue.
So, who was their first major target? Well, it was Australia's national broadcaster, the ABC. The segment really honed in on one specific comment from their Americas editor, a journalist named John Lyons.
So here's the moment they focused on. The Australian government puts out a statement saying they support the people of Iran. And then the ABC's John Lyons gets on the air and calls it, his words, political propaganda.
And this is where the argument really gets interesting, right? Sky News set up this contrast. On one side, you have the government's actual statement. Australia stands with the brave people of Iran. But on the other, you have what they claimed Lyons was actually saying between the lines, that it was just code for Australia stands with Israel and the US in their new war on Iran.
So you might be asking, how did the ABC defend this? Well, according to the Sky News host, their whole defense came down to one word, expert. The argument was basically that because Lyons is an expert, he doesn't have to follow the same impartiality rules as your average reporter.
Yeah, that whole expert defense, it did not go over well in political circles. The segment was quick to show this really sharp comeback from Labor Senator Raf Sakone. He said, if standing with women beaten in the streets is propaganda, then we have lost our moral compass. And this was presented as, clear proof that there was a real political pushback.
From there, the critique moves right up the ladder to the head of ABC News, Justin Stevens. And the host really sets the scene here, reminding everyone that this wasn't happening in a vacuum. This was all going down while bombs were literally dropping on Iran. A huge international crisis. And it's with that as the backdrop that the news boss's own behavior got put under the microscope. The real accusation here was about the perceived attitude at the very top. The source described him as, and I'm quoting, bizarrely grinning in a happy snap with staff, and watching Lyons with admiration as if he's some kind of fan. The implication? A serious lack of seriousness from leadership during a major world event.
Okay, but the ABC wasn't the only one they went after. The segment then shifted gears to a whole different example. This one came from the morning show Sunrise, and it was all about a, let's say, very controversial way of describing Iran's late leader.
Right, so the whole thing blew up over this comment from Amanda Rose. They were talking about public mourning for the leader who had passed away, and she pushed back on a politician calling the man a spiritual leader. And, yep, those were the words that became the center of the whole firestorm.
That phrase, spiritual leader, that was it. That was the flashpoint. The Sky News host jumped on it immediately and basically boiled the whole argument down to one single question. Was he a spiritual leader or was he a tyrant?
And the answer to that question, well, that gets right to the core of the critique. When she was asked point blank, "Do you call the Ayatollah a tyrant?" her reply was apparently, "I think almost world leaders are tyrants." So the criticism from Sky News was that this was a total dodge, a generalization instead of a straight answer.
The guests on the Sky News program pounced on this, calling it a false equivalence. Their whole point was that by bringing up other religions, the commentator was basically putting, and this is a direct quote, the Ayatollah and the Pope in the same category, and they argued that's just a completely flawed comparison.
Okay, so you see the examples, but why? Why would the media have these perspectives, according to the source? Well, the program didn't just criticize, their guests actually put forward a theory to explain the motivation behind it all.
One guest actually gave it a name, moral confusion. He described it as this kind of mental trap where a commentator's own biases, like, say, a bias against certain countries, makes them unable to tell the difference between right and wrong when they look at a messy geopolitical situation.
That guest, Nick Kata, even broke it down into a kind of three-step process. Step 1, he said, is you start with a really strong dislike for the U.S. and Israel. Step 2, that leads you to assume that whoever is on the other side must be the good guy somehow. And the result, step 3, you end up downplaying or even making excuses for the terrible things those opponents do, in this case, the Iranian regime.
So all of this, the examples, the theory, it all builds to the segment's final, and I mean forceful, conclusion. And it's a direct call for change, aimed right back at the ABC.
Yeah, they didn't end with a polite suggestion. This was a flat-out demand. The host's final word on it was that the ABC, quote, is utterly broken and infiltrated by radicals with ugly agendas, and it must face radical reforms if we are expected to continue financing this rubbish.
Wow. And just to double down on that, the guest, Nick Camelda, backed that up completely. He called the ABC a total irrelevance these days, arguing that it just hasn't been at the front and center of national life for like 30 years or more.
So after we've walked through this whole intense media-on-media takedown, it kind of leaves us with this huge, lingering question, doesn't it? When an expert gives their take, what makes it analysis and not just their own personal opinion? Where do you even draw that line? And maybe more importantly, in today's world, who gets to be the one to draw it?